Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be your moderator for today's webinar organized by Funds for NGOs. Today's topic is the effects of artificial intelligence on crowdfunding. First of all, I want to thank each one of you for taking out time from your busy schedules. This webinar will run for 60 minutes, which includes 45 minutes of presentation, followed by a 15 minutes of Q&A session. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A option on your webinar screen to post your questions and we will respond to them during the Q&A session. Let's begin with webinar objective. By the end of this webinar, participants will be able to understand how AI transforms crowdfunding donor engagement strategies, to explore tools automation for optimizing fundraising campaigns, to analyze data insights and predictive analytics to boost campaign success, to address ethical concerns and develop a strategic AI integration roadmap. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available in the video section of the Funds for NGOs premium website. And now allow me to introduce today's trainer, Dr. Christopher A. Johnson. Dr. Christopher is an award-winning journalist, editor, publisher, and business management consultant since the 1980s. He is also a former Commonwealth Nuffield Cambridge Press Fellow, a certified Commonwealth Youth Worker, holder of an MBA in Marketing Management and a doctorate in Business Management. He is renowned for his tutorials in bid writing, business planning, leadership, marketing, and organizational development cum capacity building. He is both founding director of Global Entrepreneurial Development Services Limited and chair of Community Education Academy of Leadership. He supports economic and social policy initiatives in Africa, the Caribbean, the Middle East, and South Asia. Now, I kindly request Dr. Christopher to lead the session and share screen.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Welcome to another webinar session. Let me just go into that there. Okay. Yes, another welcome to everyone on this platform, wherever you are around the world. Today we are focusing, as the moderators rightly suggested, the effects of artificial intelligence and crowdfunding. It's a very important presentation because it looks at the kind of tools and techniques that we should employ in relation to crowdfunding. It is hoped that when you complete this webinar today, you would be able to understand more than most about how AI can be applied or how AI can be applicable to crowdfunding sites and platforms that you have from time to time. In this webinar, we'll be focusing on the role of the AI in modern NGO crowdfunding. We'll be looking at issues around donor targeting, predictive tools being used, AI chatbots, ethics, and of course, looking at emerging trends in AI as they relate to donor funding or fundraising. So let us look briefly at how AI's role can impact on today's non-governmental organization crowdfunding. As you know, crowdfunding really is about an electronic website or a dedicated site that is established to encourage requests from individuals, organizations, and agencies to donate either through gift aid or through personal donations and other financial contributions to that particular site. So that site can be promoting training, it can be promoting campaigns, it could also be promoting a product that is designed to help people who are less fortunate than ourselves. And so the website is established for that. What artificial intelligence does, which is man-made, of course, there are certain tools that you can use to optimize your crowdfunding site. But we'll be looking not only at the tools that are being used, but we'll be looking at the messaging, because messaging is very important in any campaign that we do. It doesn't matter what tools you have, the message has to be clear, it has to be accurate, it has to be factual, and it has to be targetable. In other words, it has to reflect what donors are thinking about. It has to be precisional, concisional, etc. And as it says on the screen there, you have to be trustworthy. In other words, people must be able to rely on you for the truth and the information that you put. So the AI or the artificial intelligence tools that we use can only be effective and efficient if the information and data on the platform is, as I said, is accurate and precise. If we are going to target efficiently and effectively certain donors, whether they are small donors, medium-sized or large-scale donors, we have to understand the kind of predictive tools that AI have. And most of these tools are based on looking at the different types of wealth assets that donors have. So again, if you're talking about multinationals, you have to look at their wealth portfolio. That is how much they invest in certain types of activities vis-a-vis what they actually gather in terms of their own portfolios. And then you have to look at their behavior, their attitude towards charities and not-for-profit organizations. What are their thought processes? What do they think about, let's say, children's charities? What do they think about charities that are established for women-only causes? You know, what are their attitudes towards charities that are set up for leisure and sports? What is their attitude regarding charities that are involved in environmental concerns and so on? So these are very important aspects of behavior or behavioral attitudes that you have to consider. And then, of course, how would you go about scoring donors? In other words, ranking them. So many of you would rank presentations that we've done as either excellent, good, or satisfactory. That itself is a form of qualitative scoring. And then you have the quantitative scoring from 1 to 10. The higher you go in the scale, the more donors you can attract. So again, you have to find out what type of scoring mechanism you will employ, and you can use AI for that purpose. And of course, the consistency with donors in terms of relationships. How often would you engage with donors? How frequently would you go back to them again to identify what type of relationship they have with charities, what type of relationship they have in terms of giving and so forth. And then again, look at models that are similar, for example. So you have some donors. So for example, you have Oxfam, which deals with the poor, and then you have Save the Children that deals with children, but they all deal with issues to do with poverty or material poverty. So if you use AI to determine the similarities or the differences with different donors, you are in a better position to understand how to pitch, if you like, your unique selling point on your crowdfunding site. Because again, it's all about competitiveness, but it's all about understanding what donors stand for. And I think the central theme behind this presentation today is about information. As I said, you could have all the AI tools in the world, at your disposal. But if you don't have sound information and data from your donors, you would be unable to use these tools efficiently and effectively. And in front of your screen, you would notice that each donor technique, there is a description. And then on the right of your screen, the tools that you need to use from time to time. So all of these tools are based on analysis. Some of them are based on certain algorithms, A, Y, E, K, as the case might be. Those of you who are mathematically inclined or statistically inclined will need to understand some of these complex algorithms. And then, of course, you can also use Facebook and Google and other platforms to actually access donors and also use your AI tools to conduct predictive. So predictive analysis simply means trying to ascertain or determine which donor or donors you can actually access and what type of tools you can use to engage those donors, as the case might be, from time to time. This slide here is about, again, as the moderator mentioned in our introduction, the issue of automation. Automation has been around, as I said, since the 50s, and this is where machines are being used to access or to facilitate access to information. And if you look on your screen there, you would find that there are different types of campaigns that can be facilitated through the use of automation or electronic transmission. We spoke about gift reminders or gift aid, for example. Gift aid is a very big thing at the moment. I know in India, Africa, the Caribbean and Latin American region, and Europe, and the United States of America and Canada, a lot of emphasis is placed on gift aid. Now, gift aid is where people donate part of their revenue. So, for example, in the Muslim tradition, there is something called zakah. In the Jewish tradition, there is Hanukkah during the celebrations. In the Buddhist tradition, there is something called Kosen Rufa. And in the Hindu tradition, there's the Dharmic tradition. All of these traditions are related to giving gifts. In the Sikhi tradition, it is referred to as seva. But all of these are reflective of gifts or contributions people make from time to time to what is called not for profit, or social good, as it were. So you can imagine if you combine all of these different gift aiding processes and you use automation to access information, you'll be surprised to see what you get from them. And then, of course, you have donor re-engagement, as I mentioned. How do you follow up on donors? What is the completion rate in terms of discussions you've had with them? And then, of course, gift appeals, as I mentioned just now, but gift appeals is different to the actual giving, because you have to conduct campaigns. You have to find out what is it the donors are looking for. Your appeal has to be very sound. It has to be statistical. And so on the right side of your screen, you will see evidence of how you can use automation to get information. It is said in 2024, automation increased the conversion rate by 20% for UK charities. 20% is quite considerable. Forbes reported that a 17% rise in recurring automated reminders, which means people who are interested in providing gift aid were actually reminding charities of the availability of gift aid in 2024. And at the bottom there, Giving Tuesday, which is a very interesting report that came out in 2024 showing that more than 10% of companies, including multinationals, who are providing gift aid to charities, etc., etc. So there are lots of things that we can do through automation or using AI tools. But in the final analysis, we have to do what we have to do on the basis of evidence. So I think this is something that NGOs need to think about. And as I said, you need to read reports, you need to study them carefully, and you need to see how you can apply some of that to the work that you do as non-governmental organizations. While I was putting together this slide last evening, I was thinking about storytelling, where in the African and Indian tradition that I'm part of, we do a lot of storytelling. We talk about things, we sit under the trees and we talk about what we plan to do. We have people encoding and decoding information. We have people using their memory to remember things. We have elders who talk about stories of their own grandparents, etc., etc. But when it comes to the use of AI, how do we apply AI to telling a story when we're writing a particular project? Every time we write a bid, a project, a proposal, an academic paper, an evaluation report, an assessment report, even when we write a series of training programs, we are telling a story. And for many NGOs, they have difficulty in writing a story within their project development because everyone is using ChatGPT to write stories. But if you look at this slide here, it is telling you that the first thing you need to do is to understand the discourse. In other words, what is it you're trying to tell? What is the story you're trying to tell? A discourse means a conversation. How would you style that conversation? Would you style it in the form of case studies? Would you produce life quotes of individuals? Would you just have sentences strung together? Or would you have paragraphs that have, numbers, numerals, etc.? So when you're telling a story using AI, you need to use every tool at your disposal to make sure that the story is accurate. And so Gina was looking for a place to be alone. And you notice that there are certain keys that are used there, the algorithm X, the algorithm K, and of course the algorithm XM, which is an algebraic term. All of these terms are very important to understand. We can create our own terminology as well, but the important thing is to understand what is it we are trying to say, what is the central theme of our story. And then the content, once we have the theme of that story, we then produce the content. So we produce, let's say, a summary of that proposal. And that proposal now becomes part of our preserve. In other words, we have to communicate that story, communicate that proposal. We have to decode it. Decoding means to understand what is it we are talking about. And once it is decoded or it is understood, it is then sent out to others to encode. In other words, they have to respond to that story. So whenever I talk to you about a particular concept, I'm decoding it and you're encoding it and you're also decoding it too. So we are going backwards and forwards with the thought process. And so realistically, what the AI tools helps us to do is to understand how to, not just to create a story, but how that story can be preserved and how it can be communicated or passed on to donors or funders from time to time. And so even though this is a complex diagram, all it is saying in very simple language is that you must know the kind of story that you're going to tell, what is the content of that story, how you're going to communicate it to the donor or the funder, and what is the message that you're trying to send in terms of end result. So that is very, very important to understand from a storytelling point of view. And this is something that NGOs have to try and become experts at, telling a story in a simple way, but also in a way in which donors will be able to be engaged. Again, we are coming back to the use of AI, in this case, chatbots. Now, chatbots are a variety of tools and techniques and systems that are used, software systems that are used to understand how donors are supporting your charity. What is the conversion rate, for example? Are they satisfied with the kind of material you have on your website? Are there issues with cost reduction in your operations? What about the resolution time? How quickly does it take, or how long does it take for issues to be resolved? You know, and how many frequencies you have in terms of donor conversion. So again, using AI tools, you can actually be in a position to understand the impact of the work you do on donor support, because donors will only support your work based on the information you give them. So if you have on your website, for example, or your crowdfunding site, a summary of what your organization does, and that summary should include things like when it was started, when it was incorporated, who are the trustees, something about the trustees, their background, their level of certification, qualifications, experience, and knowledge, and also what is it that, the organization is trying to do, what it has accomplished, its successes, the challenges it has from time to time. And all of that information can be put on your crowdfunding site, and you can use AI tools to actually monitor how many donors are actually interested in supporting the work you do. And these are just impact percentages or percentiles that are available based on estimated studies that have been done by different organizations on the right side of your screen. Again, reading reports, reading studies can also help you to understand how donors think about different charities from time to time. Now, this is just an extension of the previous slide, slide 6. And this is where we are using now machine learning for donor engagement. Machine learning really is where you actually ask questions to the machine. You ask questions to ChatGPT, you ask questions to Gemini, you ask questions to other electronic or automated sites. And the only way you can actually ask these questions is if you have knowledge. If you have knowledge of donors, if you have knowledge of data, if you have knowledge of the way you need to engage with donors, if you have knowledge of data analytics, for example, you have knowledge of marketing, knowledge of corporate management, knowledge of statistics. So you cannot pose questions to the machine or the machines if you don't know what is it you need to ask. And that is why on the left-hand side of the screen, I've identified certain key areas. These are areas in which charities globally have issues with. So, for example, what donor data do we currently collect? In other words, how much data do you collect about donors? Donors that deal with children, environment, science, technology, education, training, campaigning, and so on. And do you have their consent to use the data under data protection laws, etc.? And then when we come to donor segmentation meaning how many types of donors in different sectors. I spoke to you just now about the history of donors, their interests. And then which machine learning models would you use to understand the segmentation of donors, for example? Then how would you predict which donors are likely to be givers, for example? What algorithms would you use, for example, to access data? And then when you're personalizing your campaign, this is where you're telling your story. What type of message would each donor segment be used? Again, how many donors are at risk of lapsing? Lapsing simply means how many donors are losing interest in your campaign because your campaign is not effective or efficient. And what model would you use to make sure that donors actually see what you're doing and respond to it? And then, of course, you have your real-time engagement. This is engagement like what we're having at the moment. It's in real time. It is live. You can feel it. You can see it. And then behavior and attitudes. Some donors have a bias for children's charities because they think that is something that the public sector should be doing. Some donors don't like supporting sports organizations because, again, they think that's their job of government. Some donors prefer supporting the environment because it is something that is popular, climate change, climate justice, climate resilience. So again, you have to understand the ethical dimension, but also the kind of bias that donors have. And how would you go about measuring? What monitoring tools would you use? What evaluative tools would you use to measure success and its impact on not only your relationship with your donors, but also the relationship you have with the charities within your organization? And then in terms of vendor selection, what is it you're looking for? How would you go about procuring your services? How would you go about using the procurement system, the public procurement system? And this is where, again, machine learning will come into being. And ChatGPT can also help you to access a variety of prompts, in other words, suggested bits of information. But again, you have to have the right information in order to make sure that you get the kind of response or responses, because machine learning, again, is what you teach the machine. That's why it's called machine learning. Ethics is really the science of behavior or the science of behavioral management. So, for example, on this platform, if I treat you with disrespect and dishonor and disregard, I am being unethical. Transparency simply means being open. So, for example, if I provide you with bad information or poor information or inadequate information, I'm not being transparent. I'm not being open. I'm not being certain. I'm not trusting you as participants on this program. So ethics and transparency are very critical, if not crucial, in the way we use AI. AI is not just a tool or a set of tools that we can use arbitrarily. In other words, use them as though it's okay. It's not okay because every tool of AI has with it an intellectual property, or properties. There is information contained in these tools, and there's also data because they are written by people, human beings. Even when the robots write a program, they're actually conceptualized by human beings. So we have to make sure that we behave appropriately when we are dealing with AI. And so there are some ethical concerns that I came up with over the last year dealing with charities around the world. And one of them is data privacy. This is where people take people's information and use it arbitrarily. They use it without thinking. We see it on WhatsApp, we see it on LinkedIn, we see it on Facebook, Telegram. We see it also on TikTok where people are just circulating or recirculating people's information without understanding the implications that they have. And we know on YouTube, for example, a lot of musicians are losing revenue because people are actually pirating their music and sometimes converting it for their own use. So data privacy is very important. And so if you have a crowdfunding platform, you need to make sure that the personal and financial data you have are secured. And sometimes you have to anonymize data, which means make sure that the data doesn't have the name of a person or organization, just to protect the source of that information. Bias and fairness, they tend to go hand in hand. Bias simply means people have their differences because of their culture, their ethnicity, their background. Sometimes they don't even know they're biased. And that is something that you find quite a lot in the technological world. Fairness is based on treating people as equals, respecting them, honoring them, having regard for their sensitivities. Technologists sometimes tend to bypass all of these human interactions because they forget that even though they're using technological tools, they're also interacting with human beings. Again, if you're using certain AI algorithms, make sure that users know what you're talking about. And it says on the right-hand side of the screen, use explainable, which means make sure that those algorithms are explained. So if you say XY is equal to Z, ZB, you need to explain what X means, what Y means, and what Z or B means. Because every algorithm has some form of explanation. They're not just letters or numbers plucked from the air. They have meaning, they have definition, they have emphasis. Accountability. Again, I don't write projects that are not true. So for example, you've written a project on training young people into apprentices, something that I'll be doing in Africa for the next 2 or 3 months. Certain parts of Africa where youngsters are struggling to find jobs. So if you write a project on apprenticeship, don't make it sound as though you're talking about an agricultural project. Unless you're talking about agricultural apprenticeships, that's a different matter. So at all times, try to be as accurate and as pure as you can. Always make sure you seek the permission of parents or carers when you're dealing with young people, when you're dealing with elders who are vulnerable, because that's very important. If you are going to put photographs, for example, on the website or on crowdfunding sites of elderly people, vulnerable people, disabled children, make sure that you get the consent or the permission of their carers or their guardians. That is something we don't do. We assume. Even photographs. In some institutions, for example, People prefer the photographs of children not at the front, but at the back. So you take the photographs where they're backing you rather than you taking the photographs when they're in front of you, because that protects their identity. Again, beware of deception. Deception means trying to fool people, try to mislead them, give them false information, false data. That is something that you should avoid. At all times, try to include people within, your information and data set. On the representative groups, it can be groups that are marginalized because of religion, their faith, their sexuality, their gender. They may have learning disabilities or physical disabilities. These are people you need to include in your data. And don't misuse analytics. Don't misuse data. That is something that I feel very strongly about when it comes to business and enterprise. People tend to misuse information, misusing it in the sense that they do not provide evidence of what they have. They pretend that is information that they have as their sole prerogative. And when you misuse data, you're actually creating problems for other people, because then you're treating them unfairly and you discourage them from actually being involved in your campaign. And then the last part of ethics and transparency is to make sure that you have a sustainable campaign, something that can affect people positively over a very, very long period. And that is why you need to use AI also, not just to access information, but also to use it to evaluate people's responses to your campaigns, and also to develop conditions that can enable you to track their attitudes, their behaviors, and what they think about your campaigns and what they think about your crowdfunding site. But again, these are very important aspects of intervention in the use of artificial intelligence. These are crowdfunding success stories that I gathered last evening when I was looking at the different projects, the platforms, and the highlights. And I'm sure when you guys have access to this information, as you usually would have or should have, you would notice that a lot of these projects are driven by different companies all over the world. Some of them are in the medical profession, some of them are involved in providing social applications for young people, but most of them are dealing with crowdfunding and kickstarting projects, as you would notice. And if you look on the right-hand side of the screen, which is, to my mind, the most effective, some organizations have been able to raise 120K from over 1,000 backers. In one case, a functional AI-enabled robot was able to raise £139 for a pre-order. And the list goes on, how you can actually use AI to actually increase your crowdfunding. WeFunder, this is Kia's Medical AI Cancer. This is the second to last item on your screen on your left-hand side. They were able to raise 1.31 million by just targeting AI smart ultrasounds, which means that this is an organization, obviously, that is looking at cancer research, cancer diagnosis, prognosis, focusing on breast and thyroid cancer. Thyroid, of course, is a cancer of the throat. And they were able to raise that amount of money. So you can see that when it comes to medical and health concerns, people are very interested in donating. And so this is a very good example of how you can actually use crowdfunding to actually access donations from different people. So these are just some of the crowdfunding success stories, and there are many, many more that you can read about in reports and stories from time to time. And again, the central theme behind this, again, is information. Information is key, because without information, you cannot be effective in using either AI or being able to access donor engagement. As we come towards the penultimate end of our presentation, how can we use artificial intelligence for social media and digital giving? How could we use that? How could we use WhatsApp? How could we use TikTok? How could we use Telegram? How could we use the variety of social media communications tools that we have to actually improve giving? Because digital giving is where people give money through digital means. And so these are some of the AI tools that we can use. Some of them you can personalize, which means you can send messages to donors. Again, you can use WhatsApp as well or Telegram. Then you've got your virtual assistants. Again, you still have to be able to provide them with information. And you can see the percentage increases on your right-hand side of the screen as a result of using different AI tools. You would notice that AI optimized ad placement, this is where you actually use AI to place advertisements. Again, advertisements have to be targeted and they have to be understood by the donors. And you would notice there that you would have at least 20 to 40% increase using optimized ad replacement. In other words, you maximize exposure of what you're doing to different organizations. And then you have your generative AI for content. This is where you produce your own videos. You can create captions if you like and other visuals. And you can actually scale up your campaign awareness to different people. And finally, this is a very interesting slide here where we're looking at emerging trends in NGO fundraising. This is where we're looking at the different trends. These trends, of course, emerge from different findings and some of the questions that NGO leaders should be asking. And so if we look at AI chatbots and automated donor support, for example, you would notice that over 50% of NGOs tend to use chatbots for donor engagement. And some of the questions that are asked are chatbots designed as age faces, which works best, etc. But all of these are questions that you need to ask from time to time. I do hope that you've enjoyed today's presentation. We have looked at a variety of very complex issues in terms of AI's role in crowdfunding. We've looked at donor targeting. We've looked at storytelling techniques. We've looked at behavior, ethics. We've looked at success stories. We've talked about how we can teach machines to help us to engage with donors. We've looked at the aspect of social media and digital giving. And finally, we've looked at trends that are emerging in terms of NGO fundraising. I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of Funds for NGOs for this presentation. And again, thank you for listening. And at this time, I'd like to avail myself for any questions you may wish to ask. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Christopher, for your insightful presentation.
You're most welcome.
Participants, now we have begun the Q&A session. Please send in your questions so that we can take them. The first question is, how can small NGOs with limited budget begin using AI tools effectively?
Yes, that question has been asked about 5 or 6 times before, but I understand what's happening here. I've said repeatedly, and this is true, that we need to, first of all, understand what is it we are trying to project. What is it? What is our offer? If we are providing a training program, if we are providing advice, if we are providing information, if we're providing guidance, if we are working with other NGOs to improve and enhance the development of our communities, a village, being involved in agriculture, um, doing wells, boring holes in the ground to create wells. Whatever we do, we have to be able to write it down. NGOs in particular parts of the world are not good at writing things down. They put everything on their telephone or their messaging. And I think that we have to be able to formalize information. And that is why I emphasize storytelling. Tell a story of your project. So, for example, who will benefit from your project? What is the outcome of the project? The way this presentation was structured, for example, is a story. It's a story of how AI can influence crowdfunding. So you use that same approach, in your own language, in your own format, content. And once you write it down, then you start to think about what AI tools you can use. Perhaps you can start with ChatGPT, for example, or Gemini, because those are very cost effective, they're cost efficient. But again, be careful how you use them, because unless you put the right information in there, you would not get the result. So my answer to that question will be, first of all, knowledge of your subject matter. 2, tell a story that is accurate and factual. And 3, then begin to look at the different AI tools that are out there, the ones that are cost effective, because you don't have to pay for ChatGPT if you're using it for basic information at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. The next question is, how can we balance the use of AI in writing proposals to avoid plagiarism?
Yes, this is something, again, people have to be taught. I would say before you use AI, before you start using AI tools, particularly the ones that are advanced, you need to understand something about research. Because when you write a proposal and the grant holders ask, for example, provide evidence of what is happening in the rural area, provide evidence in your district, your neighborhood, your township, you have to be able to get that information from reports. You get those information from surveys done. You may have to do your own research by doing questionnaires. So what you do is to make sure that every information you get is sourced. In other words, you put that information in brackets or parentheses. So for example, if you're quoting from a group of young women who are complaining about being out of a job or jobs, so you quote about 2 or 3 of them, different age groups, and then you put in bracket interviews done, and you put if it's in a community center or faith organization, and you put the month and the year, June 2025 at the community center, interviews done with 5 young women between the ages of 18 to 25. That is how you do it. Okay, so that is how you could actually avoid plagiarism or what is called lack of transparency. Make sure that everything that you say, you source that information. Don't make it up because the funders will know. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your input, Doctor. The next question is how do we ensure the insights we get from AI are actionable and not just complex data points?
Again, coming back to the question that the earlier participant asked, you have to know your subject matter. So, for example, if you ask a question, let's say on ChatGPT, for example, please provide me with some information from Chandigarh about the state of unemployment among young people, or please help me to access information from Addis Ababa, which is the capital of Ethiopia, for young people involved in sports, or could you provide some information from Bogota, which is in Colombia, Latin America, about elders who are suffering because of different kinds of health conditions. Now, when you get that information, always remember that information is coming from different data sets. In other words, different websites that are collected, because that is what AI tools do. They merge all of the information that they have and present it to you. Your job is to check whether those sources of information are accurate, whether you can verify their accuracy, and whether those bits of information are factual. So again, you have to research. And that is why I've been saying on this platform over the last year or two that NGOs need to invest in research capabilities. They need to train themselves into how to do research because AI tools would only facilitate the process. But you, as the NGO person or persons, have a responsibility to make sure that that information can be used wisely because funders will know. They will use the same AI tools to determine whether that information is factual or not. So know your game, so to speak. Try to understand what is the subject matter, and then who are the people involved in your subject matter. Who are your participants? Is it young people? Is it the elderly? Or are they people who are professionals? Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for your input. The next question is how can AI help in real time performance tracking during a crowdfunding campaign?
Yes, again, AI can only help so far as the information is given. Again, this is something that people don't understand. Information is key. Rubbish in, rubbish out, so to speak. So if you have information on your crowdfunding site which says the organization was established in 2022 during COVID, it was founded by a group of young people between the ages of 25 and 30. It has 5 or 6 trustees. It is located in a community area where people suffer from material impoverishment. It is also in an area where funding has been allocated by the government or the MLAs or what have you. If you have all that information put on the website there, information that is accurate and factual, AI would be able to capture that information and data and provide you with any information that you need. The reason why, because the information is verifiable. In other words, it can be sourced. It is not something that you just, pluck from the air. So again, whatever is on your charity charter, whatever is registered at company's house or the government's website, use that information to access, if you like, additional information from AI. In other words, be transparent. That is the name of the game, to be quite honest. And that's the only way you'll be able to get support from AI. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Christopher. The next question is, what safeguards should be in place to maintain transparency and trust with donors when using AI?
First of all, you need to, and for this week I've been doing quite a lot of that, quality control handbooks. I think every NGO should have a set of monitoring and evaluation tools, not just tools that are electronic, because again, the tools are electronic, but the content is in Word or statistics or data. So I think having a state-of-the-art or a modern set of evaluation tools are important. So in your quality control handbook, you should have what the organization does, when it was started, who runs it, who manages it, how do you recruit people, staff, trustees? How do you go about dealing with accounting and financial procedures? How do you deal with matters to do with the environment, occupational health and safety? How do you go about dealing with matters to do with equality or equity? So there's so many different issues. How do you deal with technological issues? Who is responsible for dealing with databases, encryptions, and so on? So your quality control handbook should encompass all of these areas that I'm referring to, all of which have implications for the use of AI. So I think if you have a quality control system in place, you know, you'll be able to deal with AI in a very transparent and judicious way. Because as I said, a lot of NGOs tend to do things based on what they think is right rather than what is appropriate. And the only way you can know you're doing something that is right is trying to make sure that you have the right systems in place and try them out as well to see how effective they're working.
Thank you, Dr. Christopher, for your input. Participants, due to time limitations, we cannot cover all the questions posted here. As we have reached the end of the webinar, I want to thank each one of you for your active participation. Please take a moment to fill out the feedback form for today's session. Your input is crucial in helping us to improve. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to contact us at support@fundsforNGOs.org. The feedback form will appear on your screen in a moment. Once again, thank you, Dr. Christopher, and
You're
to all the participants we look forward to seeing in our next webinar.
Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.